Okay, folks, it is 10 a.m. Thank you for joining us for our Q&A, a follow-up webinar from Peyton Boland and Janelle Title. My name is Jane Boland. I'm the founder of both companies, and I'm really glad to see you on here, and I'm glad to provide this service. So last week, about the same time, we really did an overview of the CARES Act, and things are changing every single day. And I got some really great questions, and as I told you then, if I don't know the answer, I'd go find someone who did. And so I'm really delighted to introduce you to Tab Burkhalter, who's both an attorney and a CPA, and was actually one of the people I called with some of those questions to answer. And he generously offered to do this Q&A session with our clients and with people in South Florida that have these kind of questions. So thank you again. We appreciate it. And good morning, Tab.
Good morning. How are we all doing on this Good Friday morning?
Well, considering no one can answer, let's say yes. We're doing great.
We're doing great. All right. So this is a little bit strange because normally I'm used to the audit, to being able to feed off of the audience I'm in front of. So we're going to try to wing this one today. My goal, as Jane said, I'm a CPA and an attorney. And so my goal is to help provide as much guidance and clarity as we go forward through this PPP process. When I gave a talk on Monday to the local Chamber of Commerce in my market, I showed a brief video of 3 dachshunds stringing yarn everywhere, all innocent looking, and a poor dog stuck in the middle that looked like he made a huge mess. That's basically what we have. Is we've got bankers that have been given very little guidance since the payroll or the Paycheck Protection Program rolled out 2 weeks ago to where we are today. And even as late as last night, the SBA was still sending out new guidelines. On April, I did a seminar on Monday, and then on Tuesday, the SBA sent out guidelines that changed some of the slides I had talked about because they were giving more clarification. And my goal was, when I was talking with Jane, was to make sure that I could help provide some clarity to the self-employed and to the sole proprietors, because my background is in the CPA side. About 70% of my clients are realtors and construction companies, real estate developers. So that entire industry we are involved in on a daily basis. And I used to own a title company. Glad I got out of it. Glad Jane has made hers successful. Mine was a little bit more tragic in Tennessee. But realtors face the same thing, is the fact that with nothing moving, they need to have as much help as they possibly can. And this is a whole new area that we're all facing and dealing with, because traditionally, businesses have had no problem getting SBA loans, but realtors have never had to deal with this side of the banking house before. So what I want to do is I'm going to try to help go through the form and to help answer the questions that you all have. And if Jane will share the screen.
Yep, let me stop sharing this. I'm going to give that back to you. Tab, I've got some questions here. We've got 9 to kick off.
That's fine. But what I wanted to do first is I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to bring up my presentation. And then I'm going to go straight through, and I want to pull up the application to where everyone can see the application on the screen as we start talking. Oh, hold on, there we go. So everyone should see the application on their screen. And this is the first piece that has to get filled out all the way through. All right, so Jane, go ahead and let's do the first question.
Sure, the first question is, when it asks for your EIN on these applications for assistance, do you put your broker number or your social security number if you get a 1099 from your broker and you are reporting on a Schedule C on your tax return?
Okay, excellent question. I'm going to see if I can do the edit, but what they're talking about is on the application, you will always put in either your personal social security number or your federal identification number if you have one for your business. I know some people have always used their social security number with their broker. And I have clients that have actually applied for their own taxpayer identification number that's not their social, so that that information is not always being given around. But either, regardless of which one, whichever number you have for your 1099s is what you put in that box.
Great. Thank you. Hey, Tad, there's like a little sound that's happening probably from your microphone, just so you know. It's like a little click. I'm not sure what it is, just so you know. Okay, second question. Is it correct that as a self-employed sole proprietor, I can claim profit on the Schedule C as basis for the loan?
That is correct. So what will happen is you will submit, the Treasury came out on April the 7th and said, either you can take your 2019 records, or you can take a 12-month rolling, which means that you would start with April 1st of 2019 and end it on March 31st of 2020 to come up with your net profit. And that net profit is the amount that you would divide by 12 and multiply by 2.5 to come up with your maximum loan amount.
Great, thank you. All right, next question. Can not-for-profits apply for any assistance such as SBA loans or similar programs?
Yes, underneath the CARES Act, nonprofits are allowed to apply for these loans. So most of the time, the Realtor Association can apply for a loan. I don't know if, I'm sure like Knoxville's Association of Area Realtors, they can apply for their own PPP loan if they have employees, or if they have, or if they were done as a 1099. But the issue is you've got to have either have employees that are W-2, or you have to be the recipient of a 1099. One of those two has to occur in order to qualify for the PPP loan.
Great, thank you. Next question. I am an agent. I have an S Corp. Can I file for unemployment? I never in my life filed before. How would it affect me?
All right, hold on 1 second. Okay. Somebody else was commenting about the mic, and so I texted my office manager to let them know that my mic was clicking as well.
Okay.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's better. Yeah.
All right. So as an S Corp, can you file for unemployment? Every state has different rules. Now, then the issue on the unemployment is, did you give yourself W-2 wages? If you paid yourself W-2 wages out of your S corporation, then you can file for unemployment underneath those wage filings. Now then, Tennessee does not allow unemployment for the owners of a corporation unless the corporation closes. I do not know how Florida is set up.
Yeah,
So
Florida just expanded, Tab. So the governor just 2 days ago expanded unemployment. So what I'll do for this question, and just letting everybody know, is I will actually send out that expansion so we can answer that question. No problem.
Okay.
Okay, great. Next question. I think this was already answered. It was my main job is I'm a realtor. I'm an S Corp. I do not file payroll taxes. And to your point, must be 1099 or W-2 to qualify.
Correct. So for the person that's asking that question, a lot of us have used in the past, we have recommended our real estate agents to move their profits or their 1099s into their S Corp. But if the S Corp did not have a W-2 employee or did not issue back a 1099 to you, you do not qualify for the PPP. If you took all of your profits out as a K-1 distribution in box 1, that distribution is treated as dividends and not as earned income, therefore is not subject to the loan for PPP purposes.
Great, thank you. All right, next question from Molly. I filled out the PPP with payroll information from Paychex that included the 1099 contractors and FICA. Now it says not to include those. Should I resubmit the application? Should I resubmit with the same bank or lender?
All right, excellent question, because when the first rulings came out, payroll costs was meant to be both your W-2 and the 1099s that you treated as employees. So Molly, you read the rules exactly the way that I did. If your application has been submitted, then I would not pull it out to make the modification. When you actually get approved and you go for your funding, at that point in time, you can reduce the amount of your loan to your payroll. Because what will happen is if they are assuming that you're going to get, say, $100,000 for your payroll, and 40 of that is W-2, and 60 of that is 1099. When you pay the 60,000 into your 1099s, they will not forgive that amount. So you will have to pay that back, and that will not be forgiven. So my recommendation would be to reduce your amount down based upon your W-2, so that way you can qualify for the loan forgiveness. Now then, if you feel like that you want that extra money and you have no problem paying it back over 2 years at a 1% interest rate, and as long as you can use that money for SBA purposes, which is going to be payroll, utilities, rent, and debt service, then keep the money and take out the loan for 2 years at a 1% interest rate. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself upside down when it comes at the end of the 8 weeks.
Great, thank you. When I get paid a commission check, I pay IRS a percentage towards taxes for the current year. Is this the same thing as me paying payroll taxes?
All right. Okay, where was that question? Who was asking that question?
It's Estella.
I don't see that question. So, all right. When I get paid a commission check, I pay the IRS a percentage toward taxes for the current year. It's the same thing as me.
Is that the same as payroll taxes?
Yes. What you're talking about, Stella, is what's called your self-employment tax. That is the FICA and Medicare at the bottom of your Schedule C. So if you make $1,000 and then you set aside 15.3%, that 15.3% is your FICA Social Security taxes. So that's what makes that $1,000 be treated as payroll. So therefore, yes, that is your payroll taxes.
Great, thank you. So this one's from Terry. If you apply for the PPP and you're approved for X amount, are you committed to taking all of it? Can you decline it? Once you apply, are you committed?
No, until you actually sign the papers, Terry, you can decline it. So what we've had people do is we've told them to apply for everything they can, because it's a first come, first served basis. The first day of filing, they had over $1 billion go through the program in the first day. As of yesterday, they had over 461,000 applications that had been approved. So, and with the average amount being at $231,000 per loan. So what we've told people is get your application in, get a number, and then wait for them to come back and say, we're going to give you X. If you don't need it, decline it. If you need it or need less of it, just say, hey, look, instead of the 30,000, can I take 15? That's the safest way to go. But you want to apply for as much as you can, and then when you actually sign the loan documents with the bank, that's where you can do the lesser amount.
Great, thank you. So this is a little bit of a repeat, but I just want to make sure it's reiterated. People might have just jumped on. So my main job is a realtor, S Corp. I do not pay payroll taxes. I have a side part-time job with a W-2 for a few weeks. What do I qualify for?
Your main job is a realtor, S Corp. You do not file payroll taxes. So as of right now, you would not qualify for anything, because the W-2 that you get for a few hours a week is going to come from the employer issuing the W-2 to you. So that employer would apply for the W-2. Then your main job being the realtor of an S Corp, since you do not take out any W-2 out of the S Corp is not qualified. And since the Schedule C on your personal would show zero profit, that does not qualify. So unfortunately, the tax strategy that we have been doing for years with S corporations and realtors comes back to, unfortunately, not be helpful to us in getting the PPP program.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna jump to a question. I think I have the answer to this, but I want you to answer it, Tab, since you're on. So the question was about not-for-profits. So community associations, HOAs, and condos that don't have employees, only vendors. Can they apply for SBA loans?
They can apply for SBA loans, but they cannot apply for the PPP loan. The PPP loan is only for payroll. Now, then the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, those have been opened up to nonprofits as well. And so they very well could apply for those programs. Now, then the challenge that is facing the EIDL, as I was telling Jane, is over 4.5 million applications have been received for the EIDL program. Over $434 billion has been applied for, and the program was only funded with $10 billion. So Washington has a major problem with the EIDLs right now. And so we might not even see those programs really start until they get the PPP program fully taken care of.
Tab, the other consideration I had around that for our condo and HOAs is that it's really a matter of damages. So in a hurricane situation with the EIDL, when they've had property damage, there's insurance premiums to pay, et cetera, they qualify with damages. And my understanding is now from current banker is there's not damages yet, and it's unknown. So they're unsure about how the government's going to respond to community associations for EIDL.
Correct, and that's where when the EIDL was originally came out with this, what everybody heard as being the $10,000 grant, it was originally supposed to be a flat $10,000 that would go to each business that stated that they had economic harm. But what has happened is politicians have played with that and said, well, it's really going to be $1,000 per employee,
yeah,
not $10,000 per entity. It's just $1,000 per employee, capped at $10,000 per entity. Well, that's completely different than the way that it was originally stated. So I'm sure that's going to be revisited, but as of right now, they're not doing anything with that program.
Thank you very much. All right, next question, anonymous. I am a small business LLC with one employee, me, with 1099s. I do not have W-2 wages set up to apply for PPP. Do I put the monthly 1099 amount in the average monthly payroll field? Is that the correct amount to request?
All right, so excellent question. So your small business LLC, as long as that LLC is taxed as a Schedule C on your personal tax return, then you would take the net profit from that Schedule C and put that into your payroll field. You would not take the gross 1099, you would take the net off of your Schedule C. Now, then if you are an LLC that's filing as a corporation, then no, you would not qualify for anything because there is no payroll taxes paid out of that S corporation.
Great, thank you. So the next question is pretty simple. What information is required beyond the completion of this form, assuming the one we have up?
So excellent question. So what you have is the form itself asks for, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to provide the documentation to support your figures up here in your payroll. So whatever you want up here in box A, which is where I've got your payroll, you're going to have to provide the documentation for that. And for realtors, that's primarily going to be your Schedule C from 2019. That's what they're going to look at. Now, then, if you are a realtor that also has W-2 employees that work for you, you would add in those W-2 wages into that box. The other thing that the loan asks for is, the first one is your wages. The second one is that you were in business on February 15th. So you will need to provide a profit and loss statement that shows income activity in your real estate business between January 1 of 2020 and February 15th of 2020. You'll need to show economic activity in there. The third one that they're going to ask for is the number of employees. And I put a B in that one. That's your full-time equivalents. If you are a sole proprietor, it's going to be 1. If you have no other employees, it's just that single 1. And I don't have an eraser to scratch this off. I'm learning how to do this as I go.
You're doing a great job.
But so that will be a 1. Now, if you've got other W-2 employees, you would add yourself plus them for that number of employees. So you've got your Schedule C from last year. You've got your profit and loss from this year to show economic activity. You've got any wage reports that you would have had if you also had W-2 employees. You would have your 941s from 2019 and your 940 in your state unemployment reports. You would also need to include in there a copy of at least of one of your 1099s that showed that you were a 1099 sole proprietor. I don't believe that's as necessary if you have your Schedule C, but the banks just want that independent verification that you are receiving a 1099. The other thing that you would need, and this is really at the discretion of your bank, is if you are, if they need your 2018 return. My bank requested a copy of my 18 return to show 18 and 19 that I had been in business for a while, but that was more at the discretion of the banker. So the 3 definites, your Schedule C, your profit and loss, and then a 1099 from someone showing that you are independent. Those are those are the known documentations to apply for the loan. And then once you get the loan, the documentation to get the loan forgiveness is a whole nother ball of wax.
Got it. Thank you. So I think we answered this, but it's a 2-part question. The first part was, can condo associations apply for the loan? And we addressed that already earlier. But do the same SBA use of funds requirements apply? Payroll, on-site staff paid through property management company, debt service, utilities. So maybe you could just talk about the fund requirements. I think that might be the best way to answer that question.
All right, so the use of the funds, so when you, depending upon which SBA you go with, I'm talking about the PPP, the Paycheck Protection. When you get those funds, you have to use it for utilities. You have to use it for payroll costs, which in your case would be paying yourself. And then you can use it for rent that you have to pay. Now, then the rent and the utilities, you had to be obligated for those before February 15th of 2020. You can't go out and get a new can't sign a new rental agreement at a more expensive location. Those agreements had to be in place before February 15th. Yeah. And then in debt service, there's a little bit of gray area on the debt service because there hasn't really been a whole lot of justification and clarification given to it. The debt service where I have seen it has always been in the same sentence with your rent, either your rent/lease payments effective 2/15 or the debt interest in effect on 2/15. So that would make it say to me that the mortgage payments for a building in regard to debt service, I would simply say, talk to your banker once you apply for the loan and you get approved and you go to sign it and you ask them, now then, what can I use the money for so it can be forgiven? If I use it to pay down my loan that I have at this other bank, just paying for the interest, will that work? Although it's not a mortgage, It's just a general business loan. Will that count? Get clarification from them, because they are the ones, the bank is the one that determines the forgiveness at the end of the program.
Great, thank you. So does the interest rate on the loan differ from bank to bank, or is there a set federal limit? If so, what is it?
The limit is 1%. So the loan will be issued, and I'm going to spend a couple of seconds just going through it. When you apply, when you get the loan and you sign the papers for the funding, there's part of that is loan forgiveness. You have 56 days to use those funds to qualify for debt forgiveness. It's not 8 weeks to where if I get it on a Wednesday, I've got till Friday of the 8th week. It's 56 days. So if I get it on a Wednesday, the Tuesday, 8 weeks out, that Tuesday on that 56th day is my last measuring date. So you have to keep an eye on when the funding starts. Now then, once I've got that, the loan itself is a 2-year, 1% interest loan. The first 6 months, you have no payments on that loan. All those payments are deferred. Now, the interest will accrue, but the payments are deferred. Then, when you submit your paperwork to your bank for the loan forgiveness, the bank will then process and will say how much of the loan actually qualifies for being forgiven, and that will be treated as a principal payment. Now then, there is some discrepancy between what the SBA has put out and what the Treasury has put out, which is kind of strange, but that's like the parent and the child putting out different things. The Treasury Department and Congress passed that only the amount of the loan could be forgiven. The SBA says that the interest can also be forgiven. But my viewpoint is the law does not say that interest is forgiven. That is how the banks are making their money off this. So I believe that when you take out the loan, you're going to need to expect to pay the 1% on an annual interest rate on whatever amount of money you borrow. So when you get done with the entire 56 days, if you borrowed $100,000 and 40,000 of it went to W-2, you would apply for the 40,000 to be forgiven. The extra 60,000 would have to be paid back over a 2-year time period at a 1% interest, at the 1%. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
You got that. Yeah. Great. Thank you. All right. So a couple more questions here. If you are self-employed, apply for the SBA loan. What is the longest repayment term? And is there a certain amount that is converted to a grant and repayment is not mandatory?
Okay. So on the PPP, this program, everything is subject to 2 years. Nothing is going to be extended past that. And what you're calling the grant is that what I've been calling as the forgiveness amount. That amount is on the utilities, the rent, and the payroll costs associated for the 56 days that you use once you get funding.
Great. Thank you. All right. Next question. I won't use the PPP money for rent, mortgage, etc. because I am home-based. My full PPP would go towards my payroll. If I can only prove that 100% needs to go towards my payroll, would they only forgive 75%? Or will they forgive 100% if they can see that I've used it all for payroll?
Excellent question. Let me go back to the 75%. With the PPP program, you have to use a minimum of 75% of the loan to cover payroll costs. So in order for it to be forgiven, you've got to use 75%. So if you use 100% for payroll, then all 100% will be forgiven.
Great. Excellent. All right. If I do not qualify for PPP and the EIDL is risky, not getting approved, should I apply for unemployment? And what happens if we have a sale have a cell during the time I'm collecting unemployment.
All right, so I'm going to go off the viewpoint that, so unemployment is an interesting animal because at least in the state of Tennessee, you have to go in and state that you have not had any income come in that week and that you still need your unemployment benefit. So what my answer is going to be is what I'm advising my clients in Tennessee. You apply for the unemployment. Once you get your unemployment, you then, if you can get a sale from your real estate, you will then notify when you do your weekly check-in for your unemployment. You'd say, I had a temporary job. I had income of X come in this week, and you let them know. And then they will have to make that determination if they are going to kick you off of unemployment or if they are going to just deny you that benefit for that week that you had other income come in. And
So for Florida, what I'll do is follow up. We've had a real expansion down here, Tab, our Florida unemployment system. The website pretty much crashed because it couldn't handle it. So they put out paper forms. They've done an expansion that I mentioned earlier about who can apply, and that PPP and the EIDL wouldn't impact that. But I'm going to take a look and I'll make sure I follow up on those questions. Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so a couple more questions, and it looks like we got a couple in the chat. So to qualify for the loan, if you are on a Schedule C, do you have to make your tax payments during the year, estimated payments on your taxes? Or if you pay everything at the end of the year with a penalty, does this disqualify you?
No, it does not disqualify you. Yeah, because a lot of people would rather hold their money and then pay it in one lump sum. So just the fact that you may not have paid your 2019 taxes yet does not disqualify you from the loan. And you don't have to be making your estimated tax payments for this. The two are not synonymous with each other.
Great. Thank you. So this may be a little redundant, but let's answer it again. So if you're a realtor paid via 1099 and you simply file your taxes as a normal taxpayer and file a Schedule C, do you qualify for any programs?
You certainly do. You apply for the PPP using your Schedule C as your basis of income. You take your Schedule C, divide it by 12, multiply by 2.5, and that is the amount of the loan that you can request.
Excellent. Thank you. So next one, thanks so much for this valuable guidance. You are all welcome. One question, one of the requirements mentioned is there any guidance for what format is needed for the P&L for 1/1 through 2/15/20?
The guidance that I would that I've prepared is I've taken the Schedule C and I've created a profit and loss statement off of the Schedule C. So on the very top, I show the gross activity income coming in from the real estate commissions. And then I just have listed out the various expenses for the 6 weeks, be it rent, utilities, marketing expense, advertising, car mileage, and just list that out on a profit and loss for 6 weeks to show business activity. And that's all that I have done. Now that I didn't know of one bank in Tennessee that is requiring a copy of your bank statement showing that you actually spent some money out of your business, because realtors don't always make a closing every month. So there are some people where they did not have a closing in January or February, but they still had expenses going out. So just because you may not have had a sale during January and February does not mean that you still did not have economic activity in your business. And that's what that profit and loss would show. So you don't necessarily have to show a profit in order to qualify in January and February. You just have to show economic activity, a listing fee, a marketing ad, something showing that you are still out actively growing your business as a realtor.
Excellent. All right, we've got 2 more questions. If your landlord has deferred payment, can the forgiven funds be used towards back rent?
From my understanding of the interpretation is They are measuring it when it was paid, when you pay the money out. So if you pay the money in April, although it was for rents in January and February, as long as you were obligated to pay that money before February 15th, then yes, you can use that to catch up on those payments.
Great. All right, actually 2 more questions. Is the net profit from Schedule C to compute the amount to apply for, or is it the gross receipts amount?
From my understanding, they are using the net at the bottom of Schedule C because that's the actual amount that you paid self-employment tax on, and that's what's considered to be your payroll or your paycheck.
Excellent. The questions keep coming in, so let me just keep rolling them. So we have been advised that our nonprofit cannot use any 1099 vendors in our PPP application, only the salaried W-2. This was as of earlier this week, and I'm still confused.
All right, that is correct. When the rules first came out, it said payroll costs were both W-2 and 1099 vendors. That has now been clarified that 1099 vendors are not considered payroll costs for employers. So the 1099 vendors would need to apply for their own paycheck protection. And then the nonprofit would just apply for their own W-2 employee as being for their paycheck protection.
Great. And this is actually the last question. Since the net pay for my employees includes health and simple IRA, do I include this?
Yes, you do. So your payroll costs are the actual wages that you pay to your employees, the benefits that you pay your employees, if it's health insurance, if it's IRA matching, you add all of that in because that's all part of your payroll costs. The only part of payroll cost that is not included is the employer matching on the FICA and Social Security. That is the only part that is not added into this. That's a payroll cost.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tab. That is actually all the questions we have right now, unless anyone pops in. Oh, we got one more, which is great. David, what does a landlord do if the tenant does not pay rent during this time period? I get that that's a judgment call, but in terms of, I think it has a little bit to do with the back rent and the application. Maybe the
the unfortunate thing for the landlord is in a lot of states the landlord's hands are tied to where they cannot evict anybody during this time period. Now then, from my understanding, there's still a legal obligation to make those rent payments.
Yes.
And that's just going to be at the landlord's discretion. But for right now, they can't evict anybody out, but that does not mean the fact that they cannot enter into an agreement with the back rent and work out a payment plan to get those monies. Yeah. And this is the economic side that the politicians have not thought all the way through, because what they did is they said, we're not going to let anybody be evicted. But that still doesn't answer the fact that me as a landlord, I still have to make a mortgage payment every month on that property. So I'm the one that's suffering, but there's no resource for me as a landlord on getting those funds now then.
Yeah, so I would just, oh, I'm sorry, Tab, I was just gonna add a little something, go ahead.
Go.
Yeah, so in Florida, the moratorium is one on bank foreclosure. So it's mortgage foreclosures. You might be a private lender, but it's a mortgage foreclosure, and then it is evictions for non-payment of rent. And there are other ways to evict, but it is specifically for non-payment of rent in Florida. And I would say, really at this point, what we're encouraging our landlord clients to do is to actually come up with a plan that you would offer equally to all of your tenants if you choose to do so. You do not have to, but certainly, you know, when that 45 days lifts in Florida, at that point, you will be able to file an eviction for non-payment. But if you can work out a plan in advance, we're advising that. We think it makes a lot of sense.
And keep in mind that if they ever do get the EIDL program up and going, that would be where you would show your economic damages for the EIDL loans if that program ever gets straightened out.
Yeah, once we get that. All right, we got 3 more questions that just came in. So if an employee was W-2 for 9 months of the year but moved to 1099 for Q4 of 2019 and Q1 of 2020, what do you do with them? How do they apply?
You could still file for your 940. You could still file on the 941 for the 9 months of the year, and apply for them to get the PPP for those, not for the 9 months. The 9 months would be divided by 12, and then if you wanted to use that money to pay them, you would have to go back and put them back on as W-2 during the 8 weeks time period for them to get money.
Thank you. That's great. So, next question. So a K-1 filer does not qualify for PPP?
K-1, all right, so a K-1 can come either from a Form 1065 or can come from a Subchapter S corporation. The K-1s that come from a partnership where you receive income in box 1 of a K-1 from 1065 does qualify. The K-1 box 1 of an 1120S does not qualify for the PPP.
Got it. Thank you. So on the PPP, do I use my gross income or my 1099?
So you need to use your net profit from your, so you can't use your 1099 and you can't use, so let's say your 1099 is $60,000, but your gross from all sources was 100. You would put the 100 in on your Schedule C. Then you take out your expenses, and then whatever is remaining, that net number is what you would apply with your PPP for.
Excellent. And then one last question, which I think is a matter of point of view, is does unemployment affect you negatively at the end of the year?
In regard to affect you negatively, unemployment benefits are subject to taxation. So you will pay income tax on whatever unemployment you receive. You do, and that's federal income taxes. You will not pay taxes on the PPP because it is not going to be treated as income. So it is going to be a completely tax-free money. So what will happen is a realtor will get, say, $30,000. All $30,000 goes to their personal because that was their profit. Now then, at the end of the year, they won't show that on schedule. They will not show that as gross revenue coming into their business. So that's just free money for them. Excellent.
All right, that is all of our questions at this point. The very last question was, are we going to receive a recording of this webinar? Absolutely. Zoom takes a couple minutes once we end a webinar, but we'll get it to you very, very shortly after we end this. And Tab, I'd like to just turn it to you for some sort of last thoughts.
All right, so what I have got here is I'll do a little bit of last thoughts as we go through.
Great.
Because we covered a whole bunch of stuff, which I'm excited about. A couple things as you go through the application. Most of you will be putting this in your personal name, which is great. You have a section where you have the different, what you're going to use it for. You're going to put payroll. At the very top of the screen, it's going to ask you, are you a sole proprietor or an independent contractor? And it says check 1. What I've been advising my clients is that if you have an employee, then you are a sole proprietor. If you are not an employee, and if you do not have employees, it's just yourself receiving the 1099. I recommend doing the eligible self-employed individual marking on that line next to independent contractor, because you've got business expenses coming out. That's what best qualifies you and describes you. To me, the independent contractor is the person that literally has no expenses going out. They'll receive a 1099 for $30,000 and they have no expenses on their Schedule C, and they would check that box as the independent contractor. But they did not ask me on how to come up with the form, so I think that they have a lot on here that's redundant, but it says check 1. So I would do eligible self-employed. for the realtors that do not have any employees, and then sole proprietor if you do have W-2 employees. On the purpose of the loan, if you're going to use any of the loan to cover utilities or rent, make sure you check those boxes. But make sure you check box 1 for the rent. For the payroll costs, I mean, because the payroll costs is the primary purpose behind this. And I figured out how to get the eraser to work. In regard to, then on the bottom, you need to make sure you check all the boxes, answering the questions as to certifications and that you have no problems. The certifications on the back page, most of you being sole proprietors, self-employees will only answer this yourself. If you have a partner, then your partner will need to sign it as well. The slide deck, Jane can share.
Thank you.
Most of it we've gone through. One question where we talk about how to calculate how much you can pull out. Let's say you had a really great January of 2020, which was better than your January of 2019. You are allowed to take a 12-month average. And so what you would do is you would start figuring on 4/1 of 19, your gross revenue and expenses, all the way through 3/31 of 2020. So let's say you go that route. You do not have your Schedule C for January through March. You have your Schedule C for this time period. You would need to provide a P&L for the rest of this time period to show your net profit. So you can do that if that gets you more money. You will just require a little bit more documentation, but that is still better if you can get more money that way because of better sales in January or February. If your net profit is over $100,000, you are capped at $100,000. You can't take any more than $100,000 divided by 12 times 2.5. And if your main address is in the Bahamas, but you are working in the US, but your main address, like I said, is out of the country, then you cannot qualify. So you have to be a living US resident to qualify.
Great.
The application and documentation must be electronically submitted in one complete file. So whenever you have all your paperwork together, it's got to be submitted in one file. Your application must be completed in electronic format. Most banks have gone online and have set up online portals for filling out everything and then uploading documentation. That's what you need to do. But talk to your banker about, make sure, because when I went through with mine, my application was 40 megabytes and the bank could only accept 15. So they had to figure out how to work through that problem. Problems with the current process, and y'all have all heard the horror stories that are out there. Just talk to your bank and find out. The money is starting to flow, and hopefully the banks are starting to get some guidance on what to do. But talk with your banker about the process and just stay in touch with them. Most realtors will not have a business license, but they will have their real estate license. So I would include a copy of your license with your application to prove that you are a licensed professional. You may not have any economic income during part of that time period because of the ups and downs, but if you've got your license and you've kept your licensure up to date, include that with your application for proof that you are an ongoing business. And we've covered the rest of that section already. What the funds can be spent on. In regard to this, what I've told every client is when you get the loan, move the money into a separate checking account so you can track how that money is spent, because that's what the government is going to come back and want to audit to make sure. So if you know that you're going to use all of the $30,000 or say the $50,000 for yourself, I would put it into a separate account for that purpose, and then over the next 8 weeks, take out a consistent amount, or every 8 weeks, going from that business loan account into your personal checking account to show that it was going into your personal account for payroll purposes. Or if you're going to use it to cover utility payments or interest payments on mortgage obligations, then you can show it going out to Verizon or to Comcast or whoever your utility company providers are down there. The bottom one doesn't really apply to realtors because y'all work in the tip business, but that's going to be interesting to see how they benefit the restaurants with that one. Payroll costs, again, are salary, wage, and commissions. Cash tips or equivalent, vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave. Payment required for provisions of group health care benefits, including insurance premiums, retirement benefits. So if you fully fund your 401k or a SEP plan, you get to add that back in. And those retirement benefits, only the salary and wages are capped at $100,000. Then everything else goes in above that. So this has a $100,000 cap per person. Everything else is added on top of that. So if you do the full max on your health insurance, let's say you have a $52,000 SEP plan, plus you are at a $250,000 Schedule C, that $250,000 is capped at $100,000.
Yep.
But you get your SEP at $52,000, and if your health insurance, say, is $24,000, then you actually would be able to qualify for $176,000. Divide that by 12. And I don't have my calculator with me, but that's going to be a 156. That's going to be a 5. No, it's going to be a 4. So roughly $14,000 times 2.5. So it's going to be putting you roughly at $35,000 that you would get because of your retirement and your health insurance.
Excellent.
Then payment of state and local taxes. So now you all don't have state income tax.
Nope.
Now then, if you have your employees, if you happen to have an employee, you get to add in your SUTA. How not to get bitten. We talked about this one earlier, but let's just reiterate, there is interest on the loan. Your bank is going to have a 1% interest rate. Make sure you set money aside to pay that interest on the loan. Even if the entire loan is forgiven, be expecting to pay the interest on the loan. If they tell you that the entire loan is forgiven and the interest is forgiven, get that in writing and show that that loan is satisfied in full. Make sure you don't get bitten by that one. If you happen to get the $10,000 EIDL grant, you cannot double dip during that 8 weeks. That means you can use your PPP funds first for the first 56 days, and then you can tap into the $10,000 EIDL grant if you qualified for it and if you received it. I've already said designate a separate dedicated checking account, detailed record keeping of how you use the funds. The 8 weeks from when you get the funds is only 56 days. It is not 8 full weeks. It's not the end of the 8th week.
Okay.
FTE numbers, that's more going to apply to those that have employees. So the person that asked about, they had a W-2 employee during the first part of last year. They moved them to 1099 this year. when they file the application, they would only file for one FTE because that's what they had on their books on 2/15. Now, if they want to bring them back and pay them during the 56 days and they have 2 employees, themselves and that other person, that's perfectly fine. You've got to at least have equal to, you got to have at least what you had on February 15th. So if you only had one on February 15th, you got to have one during that 56 days. You can't go less. You can always do more, but you can't go less.
Hey, Tab, we've got about 6 questions that just came through, and I'm wondering if we can do that to sort of just wrap up here as we get into the 11 o'clock hour. Okay, great. So I'll read them off to you real quick. So a limited partner of an LLC that is not subject to self-employment tax will not be able to apply, correct?
That is my understanding because they did not have any payroll taxes. They did not have any self-employment tax on that distribution.
Great. I'm a PA and I'm the only employee. Does it work the same way?
As long as you have W-2 or a 1099, then yes.
Does utility payments include cell phone payments and internet service?
That, to me, I would include that as being utilities because that's part of how you do business. But the final decision is going to be the bank that you go with. So when you go in to sign your loan, make sure that you both have an agreement as to what they deem to be acceptable costs.
Excellent. So is the bank you applied to for PPP expected to get back to you in writing by email one way or the other? If we do not reach out to them, are they required to respond to applications? Interesting. Oh, Tab, I might have lost you. It looks like he froze. So I will wait for him to answer that, but it's my understanding that I don't believe that there is an actual regular.
Is supposed to give you a letter or email you once it has been submitted to the SBA, and then they are supposed to give you correspondence back once they've either received an approval or denial.
So I'm so curious about that, Tab, because in speaking with our banker, they told us there was no requirement that they respond to those applications. So I'm like blown.
The only requirement, let me go back. My viewpoint is if your bank is saying they are not required to let you know that they've received your application, I guess I've always accepted that more as that's just bad faith on their part.
Yeah, totally.
Now once you are approved, they have to fund you within 10 days. Now that did come out in the guidance that they actually put by the treasuries that you have to be funded within 10 days of approval.
Okay, so that's
now then. So let's see here. If we do not reach out to them, are they required to respond to applications? I guess, Jane, what you're saying is that from your banker, they're saying they don't have to respond at all.
They're overwhelmed. They don't have to respond. That's like literally what we've been told. Especially with this next question about, do banks have to, do you have to have a relationship with banks in order to apply for the loan? I mean, that's been a massive issue.
So what we've had happen, at least up here, what I've experienced with other clients nationwide is most of the small banks are getting into this because the government is backing the loans.
Yeah.
It's just, it wasn't a very smooth process for the first week, or actually for the first, well, it's only been going on for a week. So this week has been very frustrating for the banks. The banks are overwhelmed, yes. Are they required to respond? I guess maybe not in their mindset. I do know that the Treasury said they have to fund it within 10 days of approval by the SBA.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to know that if they're not communicating with you? I do not know.
Yeah, that's the frustration.
And then that also frustration reads into where I am aware that people have submitted several different applications to different lenders
That's frustrating.
because no one is telling them that their loan is being processed or not. The challenge with that is if the same person has submitted four applications to the SBA, the SBA is going to see all four of those pending applications as fraud, where you're trying to get 4 loans approved for the same person, and they could kick out all 4 of the applications.
Yeah.
So I feel like that the Treasury is going to have to get involved a little bit
Yeah.
in regard to the communication that banks are going to have to do to prevent that fraud from happening. And that also is going to get back into where there have been banks that say that they will only accept from current account holders.
Right.
I think that's more in light of they were just trying to get people processed through. But from my understanding, you should be able to go to any bank that participates in the program and they can do your loan now then. I know QuickBooks and Cabbage and a few other lenders are now then getting in and providing their own loan processing for this because the money is there and it's an easy way for them to get some guaranteed funding.
Sure. So we don't have like a great answer on the actual bank's requirement on the communication. I think that's so much communication out there.
Sorry.
Just addressing the questions directly, just so everybody knows. We've got 3 more sort of substantive ones. I know we're going over time, but if you don't mind, let me ask you real quick. If I'm on an IRS payment plan for last year's taxes, can I still apply for PPP?
Yes, you can.
Okay. I had 9 employees in 2019, and as of mid-December, I had 8 employees. Can I still use my 2019 wages?
Yes, you can.
Great. And then last 2, a general partner of an LLC that had a net loss for the tax filing year of 2018 did not pay any self-employment tax, but he or she is subject to self-employment tax. Are they still eligible to apply?
The challenge that they're going to have is if they did not have any payroll, then how are they going to prove economic? So excellent question, and I don't know the answer. I would almost look and see what does your trailing 12 months look like for net income. But from my understanding is that if you did not have anything subject to self-employment tax in 19, then you're not going to qualify.
Great. All right, absolute last 2 questions. Here we go. Person who is a stockholder of more than one C Corp and receives a W-2 from both C Corps, can both corporations apply?
So depending upon your ownership percentage, yes, both corporations can apply for the PPP, but you have to disclose affiliations.
Yeah.
So I would recommend making the application and then disclosing ownership affiliation rules and basically saying that each one is applying on its own payroll and combining the application into one instead of, filing them both at the same time, but with disclaimers inside of the application that says that company A with this tax ID number is filing here and company B with this tax ID number is filing here.
Great. And this is a great question to end on. And so we'll just put it out there. So as an eligible self-employed party, no employees, should I apply for all PPP, disaster and unemployment, and see what comes through altogether?
I would apply for everything under the sun. That's great. It's all out there. Take advantage and see what you can get.
Absolutely. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining. We will send out a copy of the recording and the slides. Tab, I want to thank you. You are an incredible human being. I appreciate you. And so you guys all know, why would I know a CPA who's so willing to do this from Tennessee? Well, Tab and I are both members of Entrepreneurs Organization. We've been leaders in that organization for some time, and this is what it's all about, collaboration and helping one another. So thank you, Tab. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jane, and everyone have a great Easter.
All right, great. Thanks.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.